British had failed on 3 occasions to conquer Afghanistan. Nobody had ever done it. This is where they didn't look at history.
I thought that this was a war that will not only destroy Afghanistan, but basically the Soviet Union.
What were we doing there? What were we fighting for? Why did my friends die? No one knows why.
This is Moscow, the heart of what was once the Soviet Union. If nations are forged by wars, then the USSR was tempered in the fires of World War II. The scale of the conflict is difficult to imagine. At least 20 million Soviets died fighting the Nazis. Soviet children were raised on stories of their parents' and their grandparents' bravery in World War II. Vicious battles were turned into simple moral tales. The heroes were communists, the villains were Nazis. Good triumphed over evil. Now communism is gone, but veterans of the Second World War still hold an honored place in Russian society. But few praise the soldiers who fought in the USSR's next and final war. This small building contains one of 2 museums in Russia devoted to the internationalist war, known to the West as the war in Afghanistan. The museum is actually a 2-room apartment in a bad neighborhood. Sergei Bogomolov and Nikolai Eliseev were both 18 when they were sent to Afghanistan, typical of the conscripts who fought this 10-year war. They were told they were fulfilling their patriotic duty to their motherland. So, like many others, they served 2-year tours in what has been called the Soviet Vietnam. They returned home battle-weary and disillusioned. Now, many of their countrymen call them murderers.
Baba.
The war started December 26, 1979, when the Soviet 40th Army invaded Afghanistan. Under the guise of support for the nation's year-old socialist government, the Soviets captured the capital city of Kabul and put a puppet leader into power. The Soviets' primary mission was to crush the growing Muslim fundamentalist movement. Officially, the 40th Army advised the Afghan army, much as the United States advised South Vietnam in the 1960s. Afghanistan lies south of the Soviet Union, next to Iran and Pakistan. The country is ringed by mountain ranges, a natural advantage that protected the Afghanis from invasion for centuries. In the first month of the war, more than 50,000 soldiers poured through the Salang Pass into Afghanistan. Over the next 10 years, at least 500,000 others would follow.
Everyone in '79 told us that we would be defending our southern borders. From whom? That's a difficult question. It's fully possible that at that time they told us it was from you. That is, from the Americans.
Welcome to Progressive.com. Oh, I see you have a list. So I only pay for the features that I need. So let's customize your policy.
The Soviets rolled into Afghanistan with heavy armor, including T-62 and T-72 tanks. But like Soviet tactics, these tanks were designed for European cities and forests. The T-72's suspension fell apart on Afghanistan's rocky terrain. T-62 became the tanks of choice.
In general, the use of tanks in combat operations in Afghanistan was not effective. was not effective. Because tanks need a great deal of space for maneuvering, gaining speed, outflanking. But there, at a given moment, you'd be driving along narrow roads and come to a stop. It would be very easy to set a tank on fire with grenade launchers or other types of anti-tank weapons.
The Soviets' enemies were a loosely organized band of mountain tribesmen and mercenary soldiers who called themselves the mujahideen, soldiers of God. They planned to inflict the death of 1,000 cuts on the Soviet and Afghan armies through small terrorist strikes.
We were 6 tanks entering the gorge. It was the tactic of the mujahideen to first explode the tanks with the mines, then to rocket the tanks from the high points on the mountains. When a mine exploded under my tank, I knew the next thing would be rockets coming toward me. I ordered my 4 men in the tank, to jump out before the rockets came. I got out of the tank, but 2 men were still inside when the rockets hit it. Those 2 people died. The 3rd man died outside the tank. I received shrapnel wounds in my leg.
Here, there were entirely different tactics. One of the things we had to deal with, one of our problems, was to locate the enemy quickly, to determine quickly where the gunfire was coming from. It was particularly difficult in the beginning to get used to the mountains, because the echo, the acoustics, you got the sense that the gunfire was coming from all sides.
It was very difficult to tell a guerrilla from a simple Afghan civilian. It was very difficult. They would in their own way stand out a little bit, but to pick them out just like that was impossible.
The Soviets seized Afghanistan cities and took control of the country's infrastructure. Theoretically, the nation was theirs, but in reality, they never had it.
The very sort of factional and decentralized nature of Afghanistan is part of what made it so impossible for the Soviet Union to conquer. This is where they didn't look at history. This is where they failed to recognize that the British had failed on 3 occasions to conquer Afghanistan, that nobody had ever done it. And in large part because Afghanistan is such a decentralized and, in a sense, factionalized country. Controlling the cities in Afghanistan means nothing. It doesn't mean that you control the country. In actual fact, what it does is it makes you a prisoner of those towns and of those roads. They're prisoners of their own tanks and their own armor, in a sense.
We can't promise that it will get you a raise. Help the kids get along.
In the early years of the Afghan War, the Soviet Army learned that its large mechanized forces would never engage the mujahideen in a conventional battle. So the Soviets began adopting their enemy's tactics. These small hit-and-run ambushes were successful, but they